Here we are, finally. We're live. Welcome to this wonderful session today, Q&A. And I can't wait to read your questions, and I can't wait to answer them to as many as I can. I really hope that I can give you a very good amount of information. So before we start, please start sharing this live with all your friends, all the people that you think will be happy to learn something about baking and sourdough. I will be happy to answer questions in both Italian and in English. So just go and share it on everything. Here we go. I just shared the link with Facebook. So now it's your turn, guys. Now it's your turn. Let me put down my volume here, otherwise I get confused. So you hear my voice. And here we go. So please make sure that you put some comments, you write your comments, and I can answer. But before we answer everything, if there's nobody out there watching this, I decided to speak about something. I decided to speak about the history of baking and all that I know. And now I came up with this idea of sharing, and especially what was my journey into baking and how I started and why I started. Well, if you don't know me yet, I'm Giuseppe Giovinasti. I live in Australia, Adelaide. I was born in Italy in the 1986, and from a family that came from the south of Italy. So food is very, very, very important for us. We love eating. We love sitting around food and chatting and develop a culture. I think it's very part of my DNA to be able to create culture. And there was also a word game there. So I started cooking when I was 14, 15. And for living, of course, I wanted to be independent. And I found this issue while I was cooking, and I was 12. I wasn't able to salt my food to taste it. So I was always asking my mom, can you salt the water? Mom, can you salt the sauce, please? I can cook myself a beautiful plate of pasta. So I decided to go to cooking school, and then I became ambitious. I wanted to be the best. I wanted to become a very good chef. So I studied, and it came very easy because I really had fun cooking. I had fun cooking. I had fun with my friends. Of course, teenagers is a good time. And most of all, I found a place where I could see myself succeeding. I was really feeling myself made in that time. And on top of that, he made me grow as a man. Being in the hospitality business is tough, especially when you're so young, and you see most of your friends before that you met before cooking school, they're actually going out on weekends. They're home with their families for Christmas, Easter's, and on the holidays, and then you're working and working and working. And it's been tough the first years because they're all pushing for you to come out anyway. So you're tired, you're working, but we went through it, and I enjoyed it so much because I had some pocket money. I had some money with me, so I was able to help my friend coming out with me and enjoying time. Uh, and then my career just started. 17, I went in Rome. Thank you to Ricardo and Federica. They actually gave me a room in their house, a couch where to sleep for a couple of weeks until I found another room somewhere else. And I started working in this wonderful hotel called Hotel Splendid Royale in Rome. And at the end of 2004, oh no, I think it was November 2005, we also got rewarded with a Michelin star, which was amazing, a very good effort. Uh, I've learned my basic there, and there was the first time that I've seen the bread made with the mother, with the starter culture, and I've fallen in love. To see that you're able to actually levain, to grow, to build your bread naturally without the addition of any chemical or natural laboratory created yeast such as baker yeast or instant drying yeast, it was very fascinating for me because we were making croissant, we were making panettone, we were making focaccias, we were making small rolls, we were making big loaves, and I was in love. It was just a love at first sight. I know that you can relate probably to it, and the flavor was completely different. So I got hooked onto it. The head chef there, unfortunately, now is not here anymore, and I've written a little note on my new book as well about him because it really changed. I am who I am today, also because of him. Also because of him, and his name is Giuseppe as well. Giuseppe Sestito in heaven. Thank you for teaching us the love of cooking with beautiful products from scratch, and it was a very good experience. So, and then from there on, I went into kitchens, different cities in Italy, and the high little close to my hometown, Trieste. In every restaurant I had the opportunity to run, I was baking. Mostly every day, some other times not every day, but if I had the possibility to be the head chef in the kitchen, I would definitely bake every day. It was my passion, so I could not serve my customer on my bread, and that was awesome. So I enjoyed it very much. And in 2012, I decided to move to Australia with my family, my two kids at the time, and I happened to work in a pizzeria, which was even more fascinating. So because I was very ambitious, I wanted to become the best. I wasn't humble at that time, but I knew that I was confident because I had a lot of knowledge that I acquired through books and studying and working a lot. And arrived to Australia starting from zero again. Nobody knows you. You need to wash pans, and nobody lets you cook because they don't trust you. And slowly, I had to make my way up. And I want to say thank you to all the people that have hired me in Australia, such as Lino, Remo, Franco, 10 Minutes by Tractor, Ricky's in Noosa, Mitolo in South Australia, and now Foodland Pasadena and Adelaide. Look, I feel very grateful and honored to be able to have worked for people as good as the people that I worked. Everybody taught me something, and it's been amazing. It's been an amazing journey. And I kept baking in every single place. The only place I actually haven't baked much was 10 Minutes by Tractor. It was a two-head restaurant. But that's fine. There were other duties. I applied myself to other tasks. I've learned a lot. I refined my craft, and I've learned, and again another passion, which was pastry. I fallen in love with pastry as well at the time. So I think every experience can give you a plus, even if it's a negative experience. And it's no, I think hospitality is a very good life experience in general. If you're able to stay connected to your purpose and not get affected by influences and going out, taking drugs, alcohol, and such, you definitely can strive and become someone if you believe. And you need to study, you need to work, but the work it's easy because you have to work. You have to work in the hospitality business. There's no other option to go through. You need to work 10, 12, 14 hours, depending on the kind of environment you're working in. And then you keep going, learning. It's a very good field and a very good amount of experience. I always told to my apprentices, it's not about how you work it, but how much you work it, but it's about the intensity that you put into your work, which becomes your training. And you can see that in every athlete around the world, from tennis players to golf players to basketballers to footballers to soccer players. Everybody applies discipline, routine, and commitment. And that's in every craft. That's in every craft. That's why I believe that any job that you actually put yourself 100% if you commit to it, can give you a lot of reward. So this is my story. I started baking when I was 19. I'm now 34, so 15 years that I've been baking. And only recently, 3 years ago, I finally broken the myth of being able to, of not being able to bake with sourdough. And it was an amazing feeling. Like I had chased the dream of baking with sourdough for 13 years, for 12, 13 years, since I was 19. And I happened to go in Pasadena and I found this marvelous baker, Mark Archer, which is very famous in Australia, and he was baking sourdough. And he has a beautiful story because he has traveled Australia surfing thanks to baking. So he was always putting up. He is very good with baking wood oven bread, and he does an amazing job. And slowly he left. I took over the section, and he gave me his knowledge, and then we just started growing slowly, constantly, and now we're producing very good bread. And now I'm happy to teach as well a few tricks and tips. And when people come and see me, I speak to them, I give them some advice, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to have a bit of exposure, to be able to share your passion with your audience. So just want to go and check if there is any question on the comments below. Let me check. Let me check. It doesn't seem like there is any comment yet, but I keep talking. Then it's fine. And yeah, so let's talk about bread a bit. So bread, it's one of the earliest kind of food that humans have ever eaten. Was for I think the first piece of history that's been found. It's dated 14 or 13,000 years ago, which is a lot. It's a long time, and bread was the main staple, the main source of energy that humans used to have. We started by grinding the wheat and mixing with some water. We then proceeded with mixing this mixture, gooey mixture, onto hot stones and eating some flatbread. So bread has evolved, and we, humanity, historical thinks that bread was born in Egypt, especially the levain bread, because they were already producing beer. So probably some yeast, bacteria, Saccharomyces have contaminated at that time some flour or some water, and the Egyptian have started baking. And then we start from the Egyptian, and then of course all the Middle Eastern of that time, Sumerians and the Romans and the Greeks. Of course, one population after the other, one reign after the other, one kingdom after the other, have started developing into different markets. I know for certain through the study that I made in the past 2 years that Greeks were already able to bake 72, 76 different types of bread, which is unbelievable. Like if you think for the time, we're talking about 2000, I think 1500 years ago, before Christ. So more than 2000 years ago, before Christ. So that's a long time. And since then, we haven't stopped producing bread. And the only way to make bread was either flat bread in the Middle Eastern parts of the world, and levain bread. And all it was made with sourdough starter, so natural fermentation. Baker's yeast is just a very recent invention. Before the baker's yeast, we need to go to a certain time in history where a chemist, I think from Germany, I'm not sure, but if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure that they developed this bicarb soda, and they discovered that by mixing buttermilk with the flour and adding bicarb soda, they could fast up the process very quickly. They could have bread from made now and baked 20 minutes after and have a wonderful bread. But unfortunately, the fermentation that the sourdough starter was giving to the flour and the water and the bread at that time was much more. It wasn't just lifting the bread and making nice and fluffy. It was also a fermentation happening in there. It was actually modifying the structure of the gluten, modifying the structure of the wheat, changing some particles in there between sugar, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So there was much more that we didn't know at that time. And at the beginning of the 20th, 21st century, we started introducing the baker's yeast. Population was growing very rapidly in the world, and we had to feed them. We had to feed them. So bread was still the main staple, and grains were the main staple, pasta. So we had to produce a lot more, and that brought almost the extinction of the sourdough culture or the natural fermentation of breads. But thank God somebody must have kept it. Somebody must have kept baking for the family or for artisan bakeries, and we now can say that, apologize, we can bake wonderful bread because we all have a home, oven at home, something that 50, 60 years ago nobody had. Because I remember somebody told me a couple of months ago, I was talking to them, that the way they were making bread in the 1930s, 1940s in Europe, I can talk about Italy, they were actually making the dough and they were giving the dough to the baker to bake. And at the end of the day, the baker would come back with this big loaf of bread, 5 kilos of bread, and that will last for the whole family for the whole week. And the beauty was the sourdough, we made them more moist, more a longer shelf life because of the acidity, the lactic acid bacteria that keeps away the mold. So there were so many benefits, and it's uh, it's great to see that we can have now again the possibility to make bread, to sell bread, to make it at home if you want, if you're patient enough. And in the last 2 years since I started teaching baking now, I feel very honored to be surrounded by people that are so passionate, that are so willing to learn. They've gone through bad times where the bread didn't come out, and I've learned how to give them advice through social media in different ways, like just straight messages, looking at the pictures, looking at the videos, and also developing some material, some content they can just tap on YouTube and watch. They can just go on Facebook and watch. They can just go on Instagram and watch. So I really want to help the community that loves baking and sourdough to bake at home, or to believe in this product. Instead of going and buying normal bread at the bakery, go and buy sourdough because it's going to be better for you. That's all. That's what I'm aiming. I'm aiming for this. And as you all know, I'm trying to use this baking skill to as a vehicle to give me the option to do more in life, to help the human society in other points. So this is my journey, this is my story, and if you have any question, don't hesitate now to post it now. I'm gonna check for 5 minutes. I'm gonna wait for 5 minutes if there is any question in the comments, and if there is anybody that wants to chat, that wants to have some question answered. So let's see. Let's see. Let's see what we got. Let's see if there is anybody. Let's see if we can get anybody on board and asking some questions. Let's see. So guys, if you're watching right now, you can start asking your questions and I'll be very happy to answer them. For just for the people that just connected, I've just did a small introduction on my story, a small introduction about my uh, why I do bread, how I came in contact with bread and sourdough, and so on, and a little story about how the bread started and the baking. But I want to give you some five most important advice tips for baking your bread at home. And of course, the first one is to look after your starter. And how do you look after your starter? Well, you need to feed it, you need to understand it, and this becomes with, of course, improves with experience. We need to improve our understanding of the starter of making bread. How do we do that? I usually say to my students and my people that ask me what I do and how I do it, the sourdough needs to become not a bad obsession, but a good obsession. It needs to become part of you. Part of you. Philosophically, we say it's a concept that becomes you. So you need to become bread. And there's a wonderful analogy that with water, especially in the Chinese culture, that says you need to be like water. If you put water into a cup, water becomes the cup. If you put water into a bottle, the water becomes the bottle. So if there is no vessel, water is just liquid. It's uncontrollable. It's fluid. It's free. And this is who we are as well. We are free. So this body is the container of our soul. And the same is for the bread. You need to become the bread. And it's very important that you understand that, because this one will make your journey into baking, especially sourdough, much quicker and much easier. So let's go to the practicality now of baking. Uh, why do we need to feed a starter? Of course, the starter is composed is an ecosystem basically composed by two main characters: lactic acid bacteria and fungi, whatever you call them, or yeast, Saccharomyces. And there are two typologies. That I can't exactly remember the second part of the name, but there are two Saccharomyces in the sourdough culture. These two creatures work together, but nobody prevails on each other, because one feeds on something and the other one feeds on something else. So the lactic acid bacteria makes sure with the high acidity to create an environment where molds won't survive, and the yeast instead eats the sugars to create gas, which is the carbon dioxide that makes the starter grow. I hope this makes it easier for you to understand this. So when we have more lactic acid bacteria, which is more sourness into a sourdough, into a dough, we might encounter difficulties into proving, because that means that there's not enough yeast. So there's not much production of gas, so there is no strength to lift the bread. In the opposite way, if you have too much yeast because we feed the starter too often, we have less lactic acid bacteria, so we will have to make sure that the dough and the starter doesn't get moldy. But it's very hard for this to happen. So once you nailed this understanding of sourdough, you need to feed it. And how do you feed it? We need to feed it with flour and water, very simply. And if you have a 100% hydrated sourdough, which means a liquid sourdough, you will have to feed it with the same amount of water and flour. Instead, if you have a pasta madre, a mother dough, or a lievito madre, a solid starter, stiff starter, you will need to use 1% of, let's say 50% of starter, 50% of water, and 100% of flour, which, to make it easy for you to understand, that you have 50 grams of flour, 25 grams of water, and 25 grams of sourdough culture, which is already hard. So these are the two basic differences: a liquid starter, a solid starter, and they can be used at the same time, in the same method, in the same way. What else we have to say about this? Yeah, the more often you feed your starter, the more powerful will be. And I don't believe in having so much, so I always say to people, have just 20, 30 grams of starter in your fridge, because that you have a kilo or you have 25, if you don't feed it, it's gonna become dormant anyway. So why do you have to keep a kilo and then figure out different recipes to use the discard? If you want, you can use the starter to make those recipes, and that's fine. So I suggest to people to have 20, 25 grams of starter, of course, depending also on the amount of baking that they do, because everybody's different. I bake at 10 loaves a week at home, family, friends, and customers. But if you bake one loaf or two loaves a week, you don't need kilos of starter. I don't use kilos of starter because I know that with time, which is roughly 6 to 8 hours, I can double, triple my starter. So it's fantastic. It's a wonderful journey. The day that you will actually nail every single step of it, you will feel like, oh yes, I have become bread now. I have become a sourdough culture in all the silliness that it might sound. So the second step, once we have our starter nice and active, I suggest to bake with a pre-ferment. Why a pre-ferment? Because the pre-ferment gives you the ability to lower the acidity of your starter and consequently of your dough, and increases the production of gas and yeast and yes, carbon dioxide, which is the leaven agent of the bread. So and the pre-ferment, as I learned from the director of Mockney, the Miller in Germany, he uses a wonderful method to flavor his bread. He actually creates the pre-ferment with different flours to give that flavor to the flour. And I started adopting that method because it was so clever, so clever. So what I basically do, I grab a spoon of starter. If you want to press precise measurement, I will tell you 10 grams of starter, and I'll mix it with 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, and that's 10%. Okay, that's very little. It's not much. So, and then I have my 210 grams of starter or pre-ferment. They've actually become the starter. So what do I do? I find a recipe that requires 300 grams of starter. What do? I grab 140 grams of flour, 140 grams of water, and 10 grams of starter. I mix it together. I wait until it doubles, and then I have my pre-fermented that can substitute the starter culture. What do we do then? Perfect. We can take the 10 grams out, put them in a container, put them in the fridge, and that's your starter for next time. And the rest will be used to make the bread. It's very simple. The steps are very straightforward. And if you can get this habit of using the same amount every time, you won't have 10,000 containers in your fridge. Okay. And the third step will be to make your dough, of course. And the beauty of sourdough is that it's a very slow fermentation. So this gives us the possibility. This doesn't give us the possibility. Yeah, it gives us the possibility to do what other tasks we have to accomplish during the day, but it also gives us the flexibility. That's the right word, to do more. For example, if I do the dough now, okay, and I don't put the starter, I'm only creating autolyse, which is something that's been created by, studied by a French scientist, I think at the beginning of the 19th century, the 20th century. So, and that's all written in my book as well. So he basically understood that by creating this uh, connection between the wheat, the flour, and the water, there's actually a work in progress. So the gluten will absorb the water slowly, non mechanically, without doing any work. And that's the beauty of sourdough. And once your dough is rested and relaxed, it's nice and stretchy, and you didn't put the starter yet, then you can add the starter. You can add the seasoning and mix it and mix it and mix it. I don't usually do many stretches and pulls because I think it's a waste of time and my hands will get too dirty and I don't like it. But you can definitely mix your dough, let it rest for 6, 7 hours or until it doubles. I always tell people don't use as a point of reference time because it varies. Time is relative. Okay, as Einstein said, I didn't say that, but time is relative. You need to check the volume. You need to understand the bread. So when the dough is double, well, there you nailed it. You nailed it. So, and then what you do, you shape, you cut it, of course, you portion the size of your bread, rolls, loaves, baguettes, whatever you're gonna bake, and it's great. I love it. And then you put it into your proving basket if you have some. And then you can decide, okay, I want to bake in an hour. Okay, you sit it on the bench, you make yourself a cup of coffee, like that. And then you make something. And then you decide, okay, I can either bake it in an hour or I can put it in the fridge and make the retarding the fermentation, because we slow down, we slowly reduce the fermentation of the dough, and we put it in the fridge. So I want to give you an extra tip that I haven't shared with anybody yet. So of course, if you have a mass of dough of 1 kilo, 5 kilos, the temperature of the dough will be will reduce slower than a portion of dough which is 800, 700 grams. So what happens when you do a bulk fermentation, which you can try after you nailed your first loaves, will take much longer if the dough it's in a big amount. But if it is already small, you retard that dough straight away to benefit the production of lactic acid bacteria, which is the most amazing part. That's the beauty of sourdough. The fact that the gluten is broken down more, there is no much in there, and it becomes a prebiotic, I think. So it's good for our gut, and there are a lot of benefits. Of course, at the end, we need to bake it. We need to bake it. How do you bake it? If you bake it at home, I really suggest to buy yourself a baking vessel. It's very a game changer. I was baking without a baking vessel until one day I decided, okay, let me try with any pot that I have in my cupboard. And I found a pot that my ex-mother-in-law gave me with a steel lid, so no plastic at all, nice and large. So I put baking paper on the bottom, I put my loaf, I scored it nice and deep, put the lid on, and chuck her in the oven. When I lift the lid, I was the happiest man in the world. The dough had exploded. It was huge, nice and moist. I can see lots of steam coming out. And then I tried to do the same with the other pot, same dough, and it was flat, not flat, but it was very crusty, hard, and it didn't explode. It didn't develop all that size that it wanted to do, and that's because there wasn't moisture. So the dough wasn't soft enough for long enough. Okay, if it can make sense. So if you can get yourself a baking vessel, guys, you need to find it. You need to find it. It's very important. So that's it. I gave you a lot of information. Unfortunately, nobody was asking any question here. I hope that somebody will ask me a question or so or some in the next 5 minutes, and then I'll see you another time. Thank you everybody for watching me, for following me. It really means a lot. For the 3 people that are watching right now, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And let me check if there is some other comments here somewhere. Comments, no comments here, and no comments here. So no questions. That's okay. Thank you so much, guys. If you liked the video, of course, put a like. If you liked what was spoken to you, put a like, and enjoy the rest of your night. And I'll see you next Thursday at the same time. We're gonna talk about something different. Next time, I think I'm gonna give you a recipe next time. Yes, that's what I wanna do. I'm gonna give you my favorite recipe, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye, guys.